Else from our team? I think we're all set. Okay, great. Super. Well, I guess I'll do a check real quick first. Everybody good on sound? Good. Everybody's ready to go. Super. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Senate Republican leader Trey Stewart, and we're here for another installment of our caucus updates and priorities. Again, for those that missed the rundown last time, we'll be doing these every Tuesday at 12:30. So you can plan for us to be available for press and interviews in a public forum on those days. And we'll have a different subject we'll be briefing you on from our caucus's priorities each of those weeks. And so last week was child welfare, and this week we're going to be talking about energy policy in the state of Maine. And to do that, I'm going to kick it over here in just a minute to Senator Harrington, who is our lead on that committee. And again, just as a reminder to folks, we will have time for Q&A at the end, both about energy policy or about anything else you want to talk about this week that's on your radars, and we're happy to field those questions as well. So with that, I'll turn it over to Senator Harrington.
Good afternoon, Senator Matt Harrington. I have the honor of representing 4 communities in inland York County. I want to start by telling a story today of this past campaign cycle. Knocking on doors. I knocked on the door of an older woman. I introduced myself. She recognized me immediately, probably from all the mail I sent out. Before I could go any further, she had tears well up in her eyes. She told me for the first time in her life, at over 70 years old, she had to ask for heating assistance. For the first time in her life, she could not provide for herself. That not only shattered her as someone who prided herself in being able to build an independent life, the stress of that paying for basic necessities brought her to tears. I wish I could tell you that was the only story like that from a constituent in my district, but it's not. And I know the colleagues behind me, to my left and right, could stand up here and tell you similar stories from constituents in their districts. Skyrocketing energy costs are crushing Maine families and small businesses, not just in my district, but across the state. For far too long, the party in power has catered to special interest groups and pursued energy policy that has been an abject failure. And despite their rhetoric, the war in the Ukraine is not solely responsible for the skyrocketing energy costs facing Maine families. Irresponsible energy policy from the White House to the Blaine House has contributed to these skyrocketing costs. Let me be clear. This is my first time on the Energy Committee, and I know I have a lot to learn. But I know one thing is that the Maine people deserve better. As the new Senate Republican on the Energy Committee, I will approach every bill with the same question. Does it lower the cost of energy for Maine families? Just last week, I sat in the Energy Committee and listened to the Governor's Energy Office present. I was disappointed to see such a complete lack of emphasis put on the importance of reducing energy costs for Maine families and small businesses. I agree and believe that we need to focus on incorporating renewable energy into our portfolio when it makes sense. However, we must reduce the cost of energy today. As lawmakers, we must strike a balance between investing in renewable energy and lowering the costs for Maine families. Right now, lowering costs has to be the priority. Too many Maine families are struggling to put food on the table, put heat in their homes, and put gas in their vehicles. Maine Senate Republicans are focused on 3 priorities that will bring relief to Maine families and job creators. First, we must prioritize ratepayers. We want to look at any and all reforms to the Public Utilities Commission that will bring transparency to the contracts and the rates that they set for Mainers. Second, we must reform net energy billing. I agree with the words of our public advocate who recently said the program disproportionately hurts low-income people who aren't participating in community solar. People struggling to make ends meet in my district should not be subsidizing solar panels on mansions along the coastline. Net energy billing is driving up costs, and we must take a serious look at reforming this program to lower costs. Third, and finally, we have to stop picking winners and losers. When it comes to net energy billing, every technology needs to be on the table. We need to remove the 100 megawatt cap on hydropower. We must encourage technologies like geothermal when it makes sense. Let's harness the robust forest products industry that our state has readily available to us and incorporate these technologies. We cannot continue to push technologies that drive up costs. Maine people cannot afford it. Maine businesses cannot afford it. In closing, Senate Republicans stand ready to come to the table and work to deliver real reform to the people of Maine. High energy costs burden Maine people, Maine businesses, and are a drag on Maine's economy. Maine people deserve more than a $450 check. They deserve structural reforms that will lower their electricity and heating costs. And I'm happy to turn it over to Senator Stewart, and we'll answer any questions you may have. Thanks, Matt.
All right, folks. So you just heard from Senator Harrington about our 3 priorities in this coming session around energy. Any questions about that or any other topics you folks want to go over today? And we've got about 10-15 minutes or so.
Any thoughts on, there's a proposal, plan, like recommendations that came out from the Governor's Energy Office on the task force that looked at energy billing? Anybody reviewed those recommendations yet? And get any thoughts as to whether those would address some of the concerns you raised?
Yeah, I think the only recommendations that we would be supportive of are ones that actually address lowering costs. Oftentimes you've seen a lot of special interest groups sitting around that table. They may or may not have the ratepayers' best interests in mind, but we certainly do. And so that's going to be our priority. Is if a recommendation is going to lower costs for ratepayers, we are going to be generally supportive of that proposal. If it doesn't, or if it's a carve out to create a special program for somebody that's friends with somebody else that's in the legislature or in the Plain House, we're not going to be interested in that.
Senator Harrington, if you bill an act to repeal that energy billing, would that just get rid of the incentives entirely, including incentives for rooftop solar, or what would your bill do?
It more or less, it's to restructure the way the net energy billing is run in the state. It hasn't been completely drafted yet, so I don't want to speak the specifics on it until it comes out, and I have a chance to look over it with all the stakeholders. I can just tell you, like I said, I am brand new to the Energy Committee, but I do not have an agenda. The number one focus for myself and Senate Republicans is to lower the costs of energy. However, we do that. For my term in the legislature, in the House, it's far too often that I see agendas being pushed, and then magically certain special interest groups donate to their PACs, and we got to be looking at what will lower the costs and not what will line the pockets of political action committees, and that's clearly what we've seen with solar over the last several years.
Net metering is where you have solar panels and they produce excess, right? More than you need for your home, you can sell it back to the grid, right? That's what you want to end?
Not end it, just restructure it.
How does it drive up the cost of everyone else's energy to do that?
Well, more or less, with net energy billing, we're subsidizing. So those who can't afford solar are now paying for the distribution costs for those who can afford to put solar on their roofs.
And I can jump in here too as well. I spent 2 years on the Energy Committee, so I can speak a little bit more detail around the way that program works. The long and the short of it is that it's a finite universe of resources. So if you're going to be suddenly paying multiple times for the same kilowatt hour that you would be if you had a grid scale project, and you're going to necessarily be taking those funds away from ratepayers. Okay, there's no, it's not like Congress where you can do a continuation and it doesn't impact the bottom line. It absolutely does. And so any kickback that a solar developer receives is going to be coming out of the pockets of the ratepayers, which include folks that are on fixed incomes and can't afford a rate increase, and particularly not on the backs, or not for the benefit of some of the wealthiest people in Maine. The reality is, I don't see a lot of poor people that have solar panels, but I definitely see a lot of business leaders and other folks who are pretty well off. And the reality is, those monies are coming out of the folks that are senior citizens and disabled folks that are on fixed incomes and going right to their bottom line. That's the program that we have to get away from. That does not mean that we have to be completely against renewable energy. I'm totally for renewable energy when it's smart and when it's economical, but that usually means grid scale. That doesn't mean sub 5 megawatt projects here and there scattered all over the place. So if we're going to do renewables, and I think this is the point that Bill Harwood agrees with us on, is that if we're going to do renewables, we should be doing renewables right and not be picking winners and losers in a way that doesn't make sense and is frankly stupid.
Did you hear about the big wind power proposal that Senator Lawrence just put forward right before you? Here they're talking about as many as 400 towers in the Gulf of Maine to produce, I can't remember how many megawatts, but enough to power 1 million homes. More homes than we even have in Maine right now. Do you have any familiarity with that? When you say you're good with renewable, do you have any thoughts about moving incentives toward more wind power offshore?
Sure, so I haven't seen that specific proposal. I'm happy to talk about a local proposal that's up in Aroostook County that I'm much more familiar with. That is an example of one that I think will have the ability, because of the size, to actually pull down rates overall. I'm not familiar with that proposal, so I'll have to do some digging and get back to you, Phil, but happy to do that.
What is the Aroostook County bill that you just referred to, that you said it would eventually pull down rates?
Yeah, so that was a bill that passed in the previous legislature. I can't remember the LD right now, it's 1711 or something to that effect. That bill would have allowed for 2 RFPs, both of which have gone out, and I believe both of which have been awarded. Now, the tricky part is because of the referendum that passed in regards to the CMP corridor, there's now an additional step that might need to occur. So I suspect that we'll see more analysis done here in the legislature, more details around what exactly the impact is going to be, but the long and short of it is that's a project where we're going to have another state that's interested in purchasing renewables, Massachusetts, build and construct the line that we can then also tap into for benefits for local ratepayers here in Maine as well. If the math works out the way that we're hoping that it will, that will be a result. That will be a example of renewables done in a sensible way, rather than a nonsensical way, which is what NEB is currently doing. Yeah, go ahead.
Quantify it all, just the financial impact that net energy billing has had on the average ratepayer, whether in terms of its increase in electric bill X% or by this much a month?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the place to look at, and I'm not going to speak to the utilities component on this, because those are the folks that are the experts, and you need to talk with them. The short answer is more. It's going to cost more now. It's going to cost more going into the future, and it's something that we need to be steering away from rather than diving headfirst into. I would recommend that you touch base with them. I think the piece that you want to look at is the stranded cost component of your bill. That's where you're going to see exponential growth in that program, which is a direct result of net energy billing and a direct result of kickbacks that are going to the solar lobby.
What is it? What's
Go on.
Sorry.
Yep.
What does transparency in the PUC bidding process look like to you guys? Do you trust the members of the PUC to get the best rate available for Maine's ratepayers?
So I think that the PUC is a group of pretty smart folks over there, and this is not a knock against them. I think what it is a problem with is that we've hamstrung ourselves as a state in terms of how we go out and actually bid the generation side of your bill. So as you all know, the movement of electrons, the transmission and distribution is done by the utilities, but we enter into these long-term contracts. Oftentimes they're bid at the worst time of the year. The generators know that, and so there's a possibility that they might, engage in some sort of price hikes. But the point is we're locked in, so then if the price goes down the next month, we don't benefit from that at all. I think also too, it's kind of viewed as a black box where they pull the curtain behind them and they do a bunch of math and they try to figure out the best deal based on the inputs that they have at that point in time. But maybe that's not the best option for Maine ratepayers. Maybe there's a better way we could go about doing it, and those are the ideas that we should be exploring in this session.
Just to clarify off of what you just said a bit, I understand you guys are saying you want to lower costs for ratepayers, and I was going to say how to do that by charging more for the power companies or the federal government. But are you saying that we should rethink how we're going about these solar projects so they won't cause more money coming out of ratepayers' pockets?
So the collision course that we're on right now as a state is in no way, shape, or form not going to raise rates. It is going to raise rates. It is going to raise rates by a substantial amount. I won't give you a specific number today because you'll have to talk to the utilities about that. They can give you that specific number. And we'll continue to refine that number as more and more projects come online. So every time you drive by some more solar panels or another project that's being developed, and they're being developed everywhere from Kittery to Fort Kent and everywhere in between. Every time that another one of those projects is hooked up, you can expect to see an increase in your monthly bill from your utility. and they're just the pass-through. We have got to get away from that type of procurement. It's the only type in statute that is actually set in law in Maine. Every other bit of energy generation in Maine is done with a competitive bid process through the PUC, where they say we need 400 megawatts of, 400 megawatts of renewable energy, and we're willing to get it from wind or solar, and we need to be at a competitive price. So the developers at the grid scale level will then submit their bids, and we'll try, hopefully, the PUC would select the lowest one for ratepayers. This is not that. This is a rate that is set in statute that is often 4 or 5 times more than that competitive bid, and is also for smaller scale projects. So we're getting less renewable energy at an exponentially higher rate, and it's by and large being developed by out-of-state developers. Where's the benefit to Maine people?
Building off of that.
Sorry, go ahead.
Building off of that, one of the things that Senator Lawrence has proposed in this bill, I know you said you haven't seen it, is a procurement schedule beginning in mid-2025 for the PUC to start procuring offshore wind. And he says that it would have, there would be clauses in there that they would only do it if it's in the interest of ratepayers. When we're talking about offshore wind, do you think those sort of procurement, long-term procurement contracts make sense for a project like that, similar to what?
I'd say I'd want to know what the rate's going to be, and I'd want to know what they mean when they say interest of ratepayers. Because to us, that's code for we're going to try to find some other ways to play some gimmicks rather than look at the most important number, which is what's the kilowatt hour rate? How is this going to impact your bill? So did he elaborate on that at all, or did he just use more of those buzzwords that I hear all the time?
No, he said the bill language is still being drafted, like we're hearing a lot of that right here.
Sure.
So I think that's the specific.
Tis the season.
Isn't the biggest spike in our bill, whether it's Unitel or CMP, whoever your utility person is, it's on the supply side, right? It's the cost of the supply, not the distribution. If I'm reading my bill correctly, and we know what's going on in the world energy market. So is there something specifically that the PUC could do? I think you were just alluding to that, but I'm not sure I fully understood.
Right.
To help Mainers with that part of the bill that is set in the bidding process?
I see where you're going with this, Bill. So what you're not wrong in that that's where we've seen these most recent spikes come from, and it's largely come from the natural gas industry, which Maine is over-reliant on. But here's a thought. In my neck of the woods, the Nemissa territory that serves Aroostook County, we don't have any natural gas. Why are we indexed to that rate? Is there a way we could do it better? Is there a way that we could find a more competitive process that allows for lower generation to come into Maine, lower cost generation to come into Maine, that can then steer us away from those, right? And that's not saying that any one thing is the right answer. I think it's gonna take a lot of smart people, a lot of frankly good attorneys over at the PUC to be able to figure out what is the best deal that we can possibly get for the state. Not one that's benefited to one specific industry or one specific stakeholder, but for the ratepayers. So there's that side of it, right? The net energy billing piece is actually on the transmission and distribution side of your bill, and it's captured under that component called stranded costs. And so when you look at your bill and you see the breakdown, which I encourage every single person across the state to actually do and ask questions about, because you, I'm sure, will learn something. I do every time that I talk about this subject. I find myself learning more and more about it. It's complicated, it's hard to dig into, but importantly, to get at the root of what's happening on the utility side, the biggest increases I think you're going to see over the next few years are going to be a direct result of net energy billing. And where's that money going? Again, to the wealthiest Mainers. Take one more question, then we got to wrap.
Where do we go from here? Beyond saying that X is doing it wrong, where do we go from here to provide resolutions?
Yeah, so all of these ideas, which you should have a paper about, we'll also be sending out digital copies as well with bills that you can actually follow along with in the public hearing process. And I encourage folks to weigh in that and to share with us what you think the most important component is of your of how you engage with electricity in the state of Maine. I would reckon that what you're going to see and hear from Maine people is the same thing, which is that cost and the impact to them and their business is the single most important thing. And that is something that has not been prioritized for the last 4 going on 5 years here in Augusta, and it's creating real problems, and the chickens are coming home to roost. Matt, do you have any closing thoughts? Okay. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it. We'll see you next week.
Yeah, no, I didn't want to ask you on that.
We can go upstairs.
Oh, after this, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, sure. Yeah, whatever your schedule is. I don't need long.
I don't know, I was trying to figure out if that was, they should have probably asked for it.